Like many other children, why was a very frequently used word in my vocabulary. The amount of times that I asked follow-up question after follow-up question was ridiculous. I held an insatiable curiosity that I'm sure oftentimes annoyed my parents, but there were just many things that interested me about the real world. The taboos, the cliches, the things that you mutter under your breath, and the sentences that trail off without needing to be said, they all interested me. I was fascinated, curious, and confused by these phenomena that I stumbled across in daily life. One particularly interesting topic to me was women's stories. Their experiences, specifically the ones that weren't talked about or broadcasted, really interested me. Though amongst bad dating stories and even worse, puberty stories, I found that there was a lot more under the surface. I learned through others and firsthand that women experience a lot of hardship and heartache, and it's treated as a piece of culture that needs to be glossed over and covered up. The taboos of women's sexuality and sexual experiences really puzzled me. So to no one's surprise, when I began college, I started pursuing research in rape culture and purity culture. In this research, I found that these taboos and unspoken cliches hinder the amount of solidarity that women can find with each other. And it's only when we are given the space to engage and fully acknowledge them that we gain that solidarity back. To get into this topic, we first must differentiate rape culture from purity culture. Rape culture, as defined by Barnett and colleagues, refers to the broader, deeply enriched cultural attitudes regarding biological sex, gender, and sexuality that inform people's attitudes about rape. Through rape culture, it is assumed that sexual violence is a fact of life and ultimately inevitable. The US is deemed a rape culture society because it fosters and encourages rape, instructing citizens that it is normal and natural to experience sexual violence in sexual behaviors, specifically on the part of the males. This definition is heavily tied to the idea of rape myths, which are a specific set of attitudes and beliefs that may contribute to ongoing sexual violence by shifting blame of sexual assault from perpetrators to the victims. Though they are generally false, they are widely held and very persistent beliefs. On the other side of this coin is purity culture. This is the term used for evangelical movements that promote a biblical view of sexual purity by discouraging traditional forms of dating and promoting virginity before marriage and supporting only heterosexual, married, monogamous forms of sexual activity. This typically includes engagement in abstinence until marriage education and applying shame and guilt to sexual acts. Within my focus groups, I held focus groups of 4 to 6 women and asked them to engage in the question where they engage in questions about their lived experiences in purity culture. These questions range from thoughts while getting dressed in the morning to their ideas of purity to how to navigate and create sexual boundaries. Ortiz Purity Culture Belief Scale laid the framework for most of these questions asked. Each question aimed at one or more of the components in the original scale. These components being shame and guilt, gender roles, and idealization of romantic and sexual relationships. The focus groups mainly consisted of participants asking each other questions, responding to each other's ideas, and processing their thoughts together. I took a step back and allowed them to explore the taboo spaces among themselves. Within the initial findings, there were many common themes that women discussed. The use of abstinence-only education was present amongst almost all of the women. One woman touched on her struggle with not having much sexual education, saying, "When I was younger, I didn't understand any of it or know anything. I was very innocent in that area for a while, and I don't know if that prepared me well to be in relationships with other people, because not only was it we don't do this, but we don't talk about it. I think there's a difference between, hey, this is something that's meant between marriage and having no education." Other women touched on the use of analogies in their sexual education that treated women and specifically their purity as an object that can be broken and made unfixable. One woman said, "I was so used to this abstinence until marriage culture. There's always that picture of like, crumple a piece of paper and see if you can put it back to its original form. You can't. And that's what happens when you lose your virginity. And that's what I was taught, and that's what I believed." Shame and guilt, very evident among the voices of these women. In another interview, a woman talked about more at the heart of the matter. "I've heard 1,000 metaphors comparing you to like a crumpled rose, or you're like a wrinkly dollar bill, or a car that's been in an accident. I've heard so many, like you still are who you are, but a less valuable type of thing. And no man is going to want something like that when they can have something that is clean." Within these focus groups, there was also a strong sense of rape myth acceptance, specifically that was taught as a part of purity culture. One woman, while still touching on analogies, says, "Well, you catch what you bait with. Well, if you're dressing that way, you're going to catch guys looking at you and sexualizing you because of what you are baiting them with." Shifting blame from perpetrators to victims. Another woman talks about the burden of purity, saying, "I feel like in my experience too, the importance of purity is pushed on women, and like we need to dress a certain way. We, as women, have to do that, but they, as men, don't. We have to carry more of the burden." The women in these focus groups found that they had a lot of shared and common experiences, though when presenting this project to an institutional review board at my college, they were initially hesitant to agree to the use of focus groups. The idea was that women would be sharing information that was very personal, and having other women there would not ensure confidentiality. A valid claim, of course, but it would break down the process completely. So, in response, the idea of commonality and solidarity was brought up. With commonality comes a sense of solidarity. People who live in the same hometown might recognize each other, give them a nod and a wave, and say, "Oh, well, what are you doing so far away from home?" When hearing that someone attended the same college, you could respond with, "Oh, well, what year were you? What major? Oh, so you had this science professor? They were brutal." Or after a particularly hard sports practice, a teammate might complain with, "Man, are your legs as sore as mine are?" There are many ways to express solidarity, most being accompanied by a common thread tying people together, creating an attitude of mutual understanding and a feeling of community. I'm with you. You're not alone. We're in this together. Though solidarity can go by unnoticed. The use of focus groups allowed for this solidarity to be found in these women's stories that otherwise would have remained hidden. Focus groups were used for this project as a way for women to bounce ideas off of each other, to ask each other questions and find commonality and solidarity in their stories. Montel found that by bringing a group of women together to talk about issues that are important to them creates, even if only temporarily, connections and solidarity among women that contribute to feminist consciousness and social action. Group interviews then provide one of the best methods for feminist cultural critique because they facilitate active transformations of consciousness. The point is not that the research adopts a feminist political ideology, but rather it reflects and empowers women's everyday epistemologies. Group discussions can identify local theories and popular knowledge, while group members may generate new knowledge as they attempt to understand their situations together. Clearly, one objective of the research was to better understand and explain the causes and consequences of purity culture, but the method itself also served as a way for women on campus who feel comfortable engaging in this study to open the conversation of taboo topics and to hear each other's thoughts on it as well. Whatever college students' experiences with purity culture, those are most unhealthy if fostered in shame and isolation. At the ultimate core of the research is having a group of women come together and be able to explain and dig deeper into their some shared and sometimes varying experiences together. And that's what was found in these focus groups. Women shared sentiments like, "It's conversations like these that make a difference. I think it's beneficial for all of us." Or when talking with each other, would reinforce ideas that were said, saying, it's nice to have some of my thoughts feel like validated. Like I couldn't quite put into words a lot of what I was thinking, but you do a great job of voicing what I'm trying to put together in my mind. Or that is something that genuinely ran through my head, but did not want to say. But yeah, that's so true. At the end of the focus groups, women also reflected on their newfound solidarity, saying, I feel like this is helpful for me to talk about with other people because we already said we don't talk about it that much, and it's hard to find the right time and place to do it. Or it's good to hear that you're not alone in these thoughts and feelings that you have too. That can help. Validating that is hard. In each of these focus groups, women express feelings of solidarity with each other, not just at the end, but throughout their time together. Many also noted that creating and finding these spaces to talk freely is difficult, but so needed, not just for them, but for the future generations and young women everywhere. When presenting this research at a conference, I had a woman come up to me. She was a few generations ahead of me and had a lot of passion in her eyes. While I was still sitting in my panel seat, she came up and grabbed my hand and expressed, this is what I grew up with. This is what my generation taught me, and I don't want this for you. I'd really like to end this presentation with a spiel, saying something along the lines of, but this isn't done. I still have more data to collect and more groups to interview and more stories to hear. This is a comforting little mantra that gives me space to say, I don't have the answers for you yet, but I'll get back to you one day with the perfect solution. One day I'll have learned enough perspectives, I'll have read and researched enough to be fluent in this language of gendered violence and tell you all that needs to be known. I'll know how to support women, I'll know how to advocate for women of color, I'll know how you can best help the women around you and fight the patriarchy, but for now I'm still learning. More and more I realize that my learning phase will never come to an end. I'll have never known enough. I will always be one step behind the crashing waves of gendered violence. I can't know it all. I can't help everyone. I can't and won't ever be able to give you the perfect solution, especially not on my own. But I'll tell you what we can do. What we can do is listen. We can start the conversation. We can ask the questions that every woman has held back for years that they are burning to answer. We can provide the space for women's voices to be heard, even if it's among 4 other women in the dusty basement of a college library. We can provide the words that lead to the, oh my gosh, me toos, and the I didn't know anyone else felt that ways, or the I was too scared to say it. I've learned that I can find myself among the chorus of solidarity, leading the way, and that this solidarity is doable for us. In the closing words of one of the women in these focus groups, if we want to change the stigma and how we approach, teaching young women about sex and about all the things that we discussed, I think that creating more spaces like this and being willing to be vulnerable and teaching that vulnerability is okay and that sharing your story is okay, I think that that's very important. And I think that that is evident here tonight. Thank you.